For as long as most of us can remember, the workplace has often felt like a battleground. But what if it didn't have to be? Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful idea from India that completely reframes this old conflict, turning those stiff hierarchies into truly dynamic partnerships.
I mean, it's a story as old as the factory itself, right? Management is always pushing for more productivity, chasing those bottom line results. And on the other side, workers are pushing for security and fair treatment. The result? This constant tug of war. But what if the goal isn't about winning that tug of war, but dropping the rope entirely and building something new together? So, to really understand this collaborative path, we first have to take a walk through the history of all that conflict. It's a story that brings us right up to a very recent crisis that put this entire system to the ultimate test. And look, this tension, it's not a modern problem at all. It was basically forged in the fire of the Industrial Revolution, where just awful conditions gave rise to unions and this new idea of collective bargaining. For decades, that was the model. But then a truly modern crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, came along and pushed that old framework to its absolute breaking point. That crisis became a real pressure cooker. In India, the nationwide lockdown led to mass layoffs and just widespread economic pain. And all of a sudden, that fragile trust between management and labor just shattered under the immense stress of job losses and pay cuts. So all of this forces us to stop and ask a really important question. In a world that feels like it's defined by constant change and uncertainty, is that old model of conflict and negotiation really the best we can do? Or is there a more collaborative way forward? Well, that very question leads us to a powerful solution, one that's actually been developing in India for decades, the partnership principle. In India, this idea has a formal name, Workers' Participation in Management, or WPM for short. It's a system where employees are actually involved in the company's decision-making process. And we're talking way beyond a simple suggestion box here. It's about weaving the very idea of democracy into the fabric of the workplace. So what's the payoff here? Well, on the surface, sure, it's about business stuff. You get higher productivity, fewer fights, but the real magic, the really cool part happens on a human level. When people actually have a voice, they feel like they belong, they get to express themselves. And that completely transforms their attitude from just, doing a job to being part of a mission.
This is a fundamental mindset shift. Think about it. The traditional model is a pyramid, right? Top-down control. Management decides, workers do what they're told. WTM flattens that pyramid into a circle. It creates a real partnership where information and responsibility are shared. It totally changes the dynamic from us versus them to a collective we.
Okay, but how do you actually turn this principle into practice? Let's open up the WPM playbook and see the specific strategies that companies are using. So, participation isn't just one thing. It happens at different levels. At the ground level, on the shop floor, you've got councils focused on daily production and safety. A step up from that, you have plant councils that handle bigger picture stuff like welfare and schedules. And in some cases, it goes all the way to the very top, with worker representatives sitting on the board of directors. One of the oldest legal forms of this is something called the Works Committee, which was set up way back in 1947. Basically, in any workplace with 100 or more employees, these committees have to be set up with equal numbers of folks from both sides to talk about everyday issues and just keep the peace. Another really powerful tool is the quality circle. This is a much more proactive approach. You get a small group of employees from the same department, and they meet regularly to solve problems right where they happen. So instead of waiting for a manager to tell them what to do, it empowers the people who are closest to the work to actually drive improvements themselves. And this quote, this gets right to the heart of the psychological impact. It's about so much more than just efficiency. As this research shows, when employees are part of the solution, they feel cherished and important. And that feeling of belonging, that's a motivator that no paycheck alone can ever provide. And then maybe the ultimate form of partnership is actual ownership through something called employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs. Workers get a direct financial stake in the company. Suddenly, that line between employee and owner gets really blurry because the company's success is, quite literally, their own success. Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, but what about the results? Does it actually work? Let's look at how some real companies in India put these ideas into action and what they were able to achieve. So let's take Mahindra and Mahindra. Back in 2000, they launched a program they called Total Employee Involvement. Now, just look at this chart. The number of employee-led improvement projects, they're called Kaizen projects, shot up from less than 5,000 to over 21,000 in just 6 years. That is a massive explosion of engagement. And that engagement, it translated directly to the bottom line. By 2010, the annual savings from these employee ideas soared to over 182 million rupees. I mean, this proves a really crucial point. Empowering your workforce isn't just some feel-good strategy. It's incredibly smart business.
Here's another powerhouse example for you. Tata Steel. For a 25-year period, their joint committees implemented an incredible 70% of the nearly 29,000 suggestions made by their workers. This just goes to show their commitment wasn't for show. They were genuinely listening and acting on what their employees had to say.
And this commitment paid off big time. Tata Steel built a legacy of cooperation that is almost unheard of. By 1980, they had achieved a remarkable 50 years of industrial peace, totally free from any major disputes. It's a huge testament to the long-term power of this partnership model.
But this idea of partnership isn't just a good business strategy in India. It's actually a national philosophy. It's something that's been woven into the country's legal and even its constitutional framework.
Think about this for a second. In 1976, the principle of worker participation was literally written into India's constitution. With this amendment, WPM wasn't just encouraged, it became an official guiding goal for the entire nation. How about that?
And you can trace this commitment across a whole timeline of Indian law. It started with those first works committees back in 47, it expanded with new schemes in the 70s and 80s, and it's been protected and carried forward even in the most recent labor codes from 2020. It's this clear, consistent thread running through modern Indian history.
So as we look to a future that's filled with things like AI, the gig economy, and just constant change, it leaves us with a final thought. In an environment where everything feels so uncertain, maybe the most valuable, the most resilient asset any company can have is a genuine partnership with its people.